Un flâneur, an idler, one who strolls freely. This French word holds significant connotation to the world of gazing. Gaining its connaissance throughout the 19th century, the art of flânerie has been long argued for and against, from laziness to curiosity, and St. Beuve writing it as the very opposite of doing nothing. Flânerie can be seen as trying to absorb, in a liberated way, what surrounds oneself and the environment they exist in. Yet, erupting as a common pastime of those who could only perform this type of voyeurism, the bourgeois effortlessly assume the role. While this type of phenomenon introduces new concepts of self-reflection through a lens of modernity, d'être un flâneur, or to be a flâneur, gestures must be performed. While this performance was typically done by those affluent enough who could play the part, the principles of flânerie have transformed to an introspective way of associating identity with culture and representation. Yet, in 2018, being a flâneur calls for more than the ability to stroll with purposeful viewing. Susan Sontag writes in her novel, On Photography, "The flâneur is not attracted to the city's official realities, but to its dark, seamy corners, its neglected populations, an unofficial reality behind the facade of bourgeois life that the photographer apprehends, as a detective apprehends a criminal." Sontag challenges those who associate the flâneur to be a passive persona dawned on the rich. She expresses that flânerie exists to uncover the forgotten and forces one to look closely for the remnants of fragmentized and dissolved identities. New York is constantly in motion. There is always something or someone to watch, to look at, to gaze. But can this 19th century Parisian concept still hold weight in modern 21st century New York? Can we be flâneurs? Are we already flâneurs? What does it mean to be a flâneur in the space of understanding current culture, identity, and politics? This is what I would constantly think about. After living in New York for a year, what have I seen, and why is it important? Walter Benjamin writes on this type of critical flâneur in the Arcades Project by saying, "The street conducts the flâneur into vanished time. For him, every street is precipitous. It leads downwards, if not to the mythical mothers, then into a past that can be all the more spellbinding, because it is not his own, not private." Actively strolling streets leads to a connection with the past, with an identity other than one's own. To be able to comprehend one's identity through flânerie, one must recognize other identities and cultures within the city. It was difficult to find the most beneficial place to act as a flâneur. Each neighborhood holds significance, and New York is home to a plethora of indistinguishable landmarks. Yet I thought the best place to flan, so to speak, was the New Museum. While New York is home to many famous museums, the New Museum's contemporary and innovative thinking forces its spectator to grapple with current difficult topics with invasive and mixed media approaches. Its current exhibit, Songs for Sabotage, is a collection of works from over 30 artists from approximately 19 countries. What better way to experience the diversity that also exists within New York streets? The collection declares it explores interventions into cities, infrastructures, and the networks of everyday life, proposing objects that might create common experience. The exhibition of these artists' works forces the spectator to walk around and participate in the act of being a flâneur. A museum is quiet, the stroll is slow. It begs the spectator to view precisely with a longevity. With videos and sculptures that are so abstract, one has to take the time to figure out its meaning, its message, and by doing so, one is able to learn more about the cultural space presented and how that impacts his or her image of what his or her cultural space and identity means to him or her. In Camera Lucida by Roland Barthes, the studium and punctum are concepts that arise in the conversation of photographs and in what manner one interacts with them. The studium can be very well forgotten, while the punctum initiates something compelling in the viewer, a certain unnameable disturbance that arises. In the case of Songs of Sabotage, the punctum is endless. Within each artist's contributions, there is a presence of struggle with identity and culture being represented through image. A recurrent theme that flows throughout the exhibit is the manipulation of bodies. Wilmer Wilson IV represents Black bodies covered in hundreds of thousands of staples. The figures underneath are protected from visibility, a reprieve from bodies otherwise hyper-surveilled and hyper-commodified in Western visual culture. It then defies the consequences of being seen. In a time where marginalized groups are over-targeted, one can very much witness on the streets of New York. Wilson limits our visibility and speaks of inequality and their effects onto building identity. On the floor below, a powerful array of decapitated statues by South African artist Haroon Gun Salih, paying tribute to the 34 striking miners in 2012's Marikana massacre. The striking image of beheaded protesters does not ring unfamiliar to the collective struggle of minorities being silenced and protesters being unheard. For me, this is where the punctum was greatest. The visual fragmentation of these people's identities through sculptures can relate to so many of today's issues. While these artists all chose modern dilemmas to bring forth regarding race and injustice, the baselines to their struggle, oppression, censorship, corrupt government, all resonating in these different cities, all exist for a collective feeling. This collective feeling, to me, is what being a Flâneur in the 21st century is. To force yourself to look at the ugly, to look at what is wrong, what is holding back one's own or others' identities and relations to their culture, to analyze and wonder about if one city can really be definitive for all who inhabit it. The surrealist use of flânery is also one to be recognized. After taking a course in French surrealism, one of our last assignments was to take an hour walk, to be a flâneur and have the unfamiliar streets of New York lead the way. Throughout the walk, I encountered many dreamlike and surrealist images in the space of the city, ones relating to past images and ideas I've seen and heard about throughout the year. This one in particular reminded me of Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. Lastly, what I've come to realize is this: we are not all flâneurs. We all see and recollect memories over time, memories that build up our personal relationships with New York. But to be a flâneur in this day and age is to not look and appreciate your route to class. It's not to dwell in the comfortable, the familiar, the pleasing, but to really be a flâneur, to really understand the environment and how it affects us. One must look at the unknown. One must seek for the uncomfortable, the foreign, the different, and figure out how that interacts with the space that one does know. The artist in Songs for Sabotage created an uncomfortable walk through this museum space, forcing active understanding of how these distinct cultures react with their place in society, and how their culture creates a dynamic between performing identity, visibility, and how representing identity through artistic methods can be viewed to better understand these conflicting dynamics of 21st century politics. Flâneur, in turn, allows the art to be seen for how critically it is meant to be digested. Finally, Benjamin continues by saying, "The city is the realization of that ancient dream of humanity, the labyrinth. It is this reality to which the flâneur, without knowing it, devotes himself." A museum can act as a microscale of the city, both exhibiting objects and images that verify or make us question our identities, or the identities of others. Yet, it is by being a flâneur one can finally devote himself to this important experience.